This video is free to watch thanks to the kindness of our donors. If you would like to donate £10 towards our work, you can do so by texting Henshaws to 70085.
Somebody with a guide dog who was in a new area, didn't know the area, so she thought she should ask for assistance and saw somebody approaching her, or sensed someone approaching her, and she said, "Can you tell me where such and such a street is?" And this person picked up the dog's ear and said, "It's second on the left." I'm known as Chich Hewitt. I've got three Christian names: Christopher, James, Chichily, but the family name Chichily, people thought so funny that I've been called Chich most of my life. And grew up in South Africa, born in Johannesburg, 1945, and spent most of my life there until the year 2000. I have an eye condition called Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy, often abbreviated to LHON. I consider myself fortunate in some ways because this condition, which is genetic, mostly it's men who get it, usually manifests when you're between the ages of about 18 or 30. And I got it when I was 63, so I had the benefit of 20/20 vision up until 2009, when the condition suddenly struck. I first began to notice the loss of eyesight halfway through 2008, actually May 2008, where I got like a floater in my eye and went to the optician, and nothing much came of it, but it seemed to be getting a bit worse just in one eye, in the left eye. And so I went to the doctor. He acted very swiftly and sent me for some tests in Rochdale, and by that stage I was losing much of the eyesight in the left eye. And round about January of 2009, just when I was having an interview for a new job — I am, by the way, a minister in the Church of England, and I was moving from a parish in Radcliffe and moving out to Swinton. And I went for the interview and I thought, I don't think the right eye is working quite as it should. And within 3 weeks that had deteriorated rapidly. The left eye took quite a long time. The right eye was quite fast in its deterioration. I was having continuous appointments with the ophthalmologist, and in a cross-disciplinary session she had at the hospital, I was referred to a very smart physician who diagnosed it quite quickly and did the necessary DNA blood test which diagnoses the condition. The impact of this condition, I think, affected the family in some way more than me. I was in a transitionary period, purely coincidentally, moving from one job to another. One might call it a God incident, I don't know. And so I was very concerned about that, starting a new job where I had been interviewed as a person with some eyesight or one eye functioning, and by the time they took me on, I was registered blind. And so I had to learn very quickly and on the hop how to cope with this. So I think I was so focused on that, I wasn't thinking too much about how the rest of life was going to be. Jill, my wife, was obviously very concerned, and we've got two daughters who were particularly worried because, having heard that it was hereditary, could they get it? The answer is no. Not through me anyway. If I'd had a sister — I'm actually an only child — if I'd had a sister, she could have been a carrier and passed it on to her children, but it should end with me, and I can't pass it on. The impact of this condition on my life and how it runs, what I do in work and in leisure, has been quite marked. It was an interesting development, having been diagnosed and been registered blind in the middle of February, and I thought of this technique knowing that I have to take services in a church and have to say, large chunks of material which I can no longer read. How was I going to do it? And I thought of the possibility of getting a little reader, so we got a very cheap £20 Sony recorder, and on holiday I just practiced how I could perhaps use this thing and thought actually this could work. So I had that opportunity. But there's another side to this. When I was registered blind, what do you do next? Where do you go? And we just had no clue. And even my wife Jill, with a medical experience, didn't know what you do after you're registered blind, as it were. And so Jill took a week off, and we struck it lucky with visiting a library in Whitefield in Greater Manchester. And this library had some equipment for people with poor vision or some sight loss. And from there it opened up a whole new vista. We could approach, we found certain organizations, we found that there's all sorts of equipment around. We found access to work, which was particularly helpful in getting me the equipment. They were more generous at that stage. It was 2009, and the financial problems of 2008-9 hadn't really hit. So they bought me all sorts, and I didn't have to pay for it. So that was incredible. And they also supplied money or funding for somebody who could do some of the secretarial work, and we were very lucky in finding a person. He remains a close friend of ours, and he used to come so many hours a week and do some of the stuff which I could no longer do, like filing and finding and putting paper away. He was also very computer literate, so he could do some of the stuff I could do a lot faster. And we worked as a team in preparing the services and doing some of the, or quite a lot of the administrative work that I had to do. So a whole field opened up. But it's worth noting that at the beginning it was a case of, I can't see, what do I do now? I think one of the difficulties with sight loss is that you don't really know what it's about until it hits you. And I had preconceived ideas of sight loss. When I saw somebody with a white cane, my assumption was that that person could see nothing at all. Now, I'm in the situation where I'm registered blind, but I've got peripheral vision, no central vision, so it manifests a bit like macular degeneration, although it's a non-degenerative condition. And so I can see a little bit, and I'm always concerned when someone offers me help across the road to say to them I can see a little bit, because I don't want that person to get the impression once I've crossed the road and show some signs of seeing things, of thinking that I'm a sham or having them on. So I think so many people think that if you use a white cane you've got no vision whatsoever, and I usually like to say to people I can see just a wee bit, and accept the help, obviously. The hardest problems I think with sight loss, I've found two in particular. One is not being able to drive anymore. That's a frustration. And the public transport, by the way, in the UK, we all moan about it, but coming from South Africa, where some areas just have no public transport at all, or in a sabbatical I had in the United States, where a city, I was in Nashville, Tennessee, no public transport, you realize that we're actually not too badly off. So not being able to drive has been a frustration, but I use trains and buses quite a lot, in fact a great deal, and on occasions I've got myself down to London for meetings on my own, or up to Edinburgh. Got a daughter there, and so that's been something I can cope with, but it's still a frustration not being able to drive. I think another difficulty has been in the work situation, where as a minister in a church I could take a service, and I was organized beforehand. I have to know what service I'm using and prepare for it, and my wife has read in a lot of the liturgy and the words that I've got to use into a device, and then I use the device with earphones, and so what I hear, I say a couple of words later, rather like an interpreter, although there's nothing to interpret. And so that's worked for me, and that part of a service is fine. It's the before and after, because people assume that you know who they are. And when you've got a congregation, say largely of older people of a similar height and with grey hair and glasses, as someone once said when I described the person as having grey hair and glasses, he said, you know, you've just described half the congregation. And the people assume that you know who they are, and I've often found it difficult to say, sorry, who are you? Because they might say to me, well, surely you know who I am now. The one who was most helpful was a person who had some eyesight loss herself, and she understood the problem, and she used to come to me and tell me who she was. She had a broad Glaswegian accent, so I always knew who she was anyway. What would I say to somebody recently diagnosed? I've met a number of people in this situation because I've done some voluntary work for organizations that are involved in sight loss, and reactions are difficult. Some people are terribly depressed, and some people feel there's a challenge which they can meet. But I'd want to say that, you know, there is life after sight loss, because we live in an age where there is so much available to people who are losing eyesight in various ways that there are ways of coping. Simple technology for people who don't like tech, more complicated technology available for those who enjoy it. But there are ways of coping. But of course everybody's different, and some people really struggle. Well, the top tip is for dealing with sight loss. It's hard to say. Certainly technology for me is incredibly helpful. I've also obviously found family help very useful. I think when you have sight loss and you're living on your own, it's quite tricky. I've been very fortunate with my wife to hand, who's been enormously helpful and supportive in every possible way, as has our family been. So that is a definite advantage. But I think you try to find what really works for you. If you would want to have a guide dog, go down that particular route. I found a white cane's been more helpful to me. Try and get out and do the things that you can do. Don't try and do things which are beyond you. Which does remind me, by the way, that in 2011, as a fundraiser for our church, which was having a particularly special anniversary year, I decided to try a tandem bike ride with my brother-in-law, who's an experienced rider. I'm a bit of a ham on a bicycle. And we took a ride from Edinburgh, or an intended ride from Edinburgh to Manchester. We didn't quite make it, mainly because we hit a cyclone on the way. We knew it was coming. It's a whole long story in itself. But I felt confident there because I was with a rider who really knew what he was doing, and I was on the back. So yeah, try and do things that challenge you. Don't do things which are too difficult. And I think the worst thing you can do is just to feel sorry for yourself and do nothing.
Our videos are helping people around the world to go beyond expectations. If you enjoyed this video, please donate to us using the links in the description below, or the text donation number 70085 to give £10 instantly. Thank you. For costs and terms, please see the description below.